Have you ever wondered why some of the greatest challenges seem to find their way to you? Why the obstacles in your path seem almost personal, as if the universe itself has conspired to test your very soul? There is a profound truth hidden within the ancient texts that few have truly understood. Those who face the greatest opposition are often those carrying the greatest purpose. You see, throughout biblical history, the most significant spiritual adversaries didn't appear randomly. They emerged specifically to oppose those who carried divine assignment, from Satan's relentless pursuit of Job to Pharaoh's hardened heart against Moses, to the religious leaders who couldn't recognize the Messiah walking among them. What if these adversaries weren't accidents of fate, but confirmation of your chosen status? The ancient texts reveal a pattern that continues to this day when you step into your divine purpose as a chosen one. Opposition intensifies, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something right. Today we're going to journey through the shadows to discover the light. We'll uncover how the very opposition you face isn't meant to destroy you, but to reveal you, to refine your spirit like gold in the fire, to transform you into who you were always meant to become. In the next few minutes, you'll discover why your internal shadows are actually signposts pointing to your greatest gifts, how authority figures who oppose you are often divine catalysts for your breakthrough, the surprising gift hidden within betrayal that accelerates your purpose, why religious systems often cannot recognize true spiritual awakening, how controlling forces emerge specifically to prevent your divine elevation, the transformative power that turns your greatest adversaries into your greatest allies. This message found you today because your spirit is ready to see beyond the surface, ready to understand the divine choreography at work in your challenges. If you feel a resonance with these words, if something within you is stirring even now, I invite you to join this sacred journey. Like this video, subscribe to receive more divine revelations, and comment 777 below if you recognize yourself as one of the chosen ones being called higher in this season. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Shadow Within. There is a profound truth revealed in the story of Cain and Abel that speaks directly to your journey as a chosen one. Before Cain committed the first murder in human history, God spoke these words to him: "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Genesis 4:7. What if the greatest adversary you'll ever face isn't out there in the world, but within your own heart? The shadow within, the darkness that knows your name, the part of yourself that resists your highest calling. Every chosen one throughout history has faced this internal opposition first. Before they confronted external enemies, they had to overcome the war within, the jealousy of Cain, the fear of Moses, the doubt of Gideon, the pride of David. You see, when divine light begins to shine upon your true identity, the shadows within grow darker, more defined, more visible. This isn't punishment, it's revelation. Michael, a 48-year-old executive at a major corporation, found himself facing an unexpected moral dilemma. For years, he'd climbed the corporate ladder successfully, but something was changing within him. A growing discomfort with practices he once accepted without question, a heightened sensitivity to ethical concerns his colleagues dismissed, an inexplicable pull toward a more authentic path. "I thought I was losing my mind," Michael confessed. "I'd built my entire identity around corporate success, but suddenly I was questioning everything. It felt like two parts of myself were at war. What Michael didn't realize was that this internal conflict wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough, the shadow within him. The part attached to false success, external validation, and compromise was being exposed precisely because his authentic self was awakening. This is the paradox of the chosen one's journey. The brighter your light grows, the more clearly you see your own darkness. The closer you move to purpose, the more fiercely your internal resistance fights back. Ask yourself now, what within you resists your highest calling? What voice whispers that you're not enough? What part of you clings to comfort rather than courage, to safety rather than significance? These shadows aren't evidence that you're unworthy of your calling. They are confirmation that something genuine is awakening within you. As the ancient wisdom teaches, where there is great light, the shadow also is deep. For Cain, the shadow was jealousy, a refusal to face his own shortcomings. His name means acquired or possession, revealing his attachment to external validation. When his offering wasn't accepted, rather than looking inward, he projected outward in rage. But you are not Cain. You are a chosen one who has the courage to face the shadow within. What if the very emotions you've been avoiding are gateways to your greatest growth? What if your anger points to your passion for justice? What if your fear reveals what you truly value? What if your shame indicates where healing is needed most? The chosen ones who transform the world aren't those without shadows. They're those who've learned to integrate their shadows, to bring them into the light, to transform their greatest weaknesses into their most powerful strengths. This is why you feel so deeply, why you notice what others miss, why you can't simply conform to the patterns of this world. Your sensitivity isn't a liability. It's a divine gift that allows you to perceive both light and shadow with extraordinary clarity. Today, I invite you to embrace a profound truth. The shadow within you isn't your enemy. It's a teacher, a guide, a catalyst for transformation. When you face it with courage rather than denial, when you bring it into the light rather than hiding it in darkness, it becomes the very soil from which your purpose grows. Are you ready to face your shadow not as something to fear, but as the doorway to your destiny? The journey of the chosen one always begins with this first courageous step. Chapter 2. The Test of Power. Every chosen one eventually faces the Pharaoh. Who was Pharaoh? Far more than just a historical figure who opposed Moses and the liberation of God's people. Pharaoh represents the embodiment of worldly power that stands against divine timing, the authority that refuses to recognize higher purpose, the established order that resists spiritual revolution. In Exodus 9:16, God reveals something extraordinary about this opposition. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Do you see the profound revelation? Pharaoh wasn't an accidental obstacle. He was raised up specifically to showcase divine power. His resistance wasn't preventing God's plan. It was fulfilling it. This is why, as a chosen one, you find yourself facing those in positions of authority who seem inexplicably threatened by you, who oppose you without provocation, who resist your advancement despite your qualifications. It's not random. It's recognition. Something in them perceives your authentic power before you fully recognize it yourself. They sense the divine authority you carry. They react not to who you are now, but to who you are becoming. Sarah, a 52-year-old teacher in a struggling school district, experienced this firsthand. For years, she quietly followed educational protocols, despite seeing their failure to serve her students. But when divine awakening stirred within her, everything changed. "I began speaking up in faculty meetings," Sarah recalled, "proposing alternative approaches, advocating for the children who were falling through the cracks. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I just couldn't stay silent anymore." The response was swift and severe. Her principal began micromanaging her classroom. Colleagues who once treated her as invisible now watched her with suspicion. Parents were told to direct concerns away from her. "It felt personal," Sarah said. "As if I had threatened something fundamental just by speaking truth. I questioned whether I should have remained silent." What Sarah didn't yet understand was that she had encountered her pharaoh. The opposition wasn't personal. It was positional. It wasn't about her performance. It was about her purpose. The systems of this world instinctively resist those carrying authentic spiritual authority. Because true authority doesn't come from titles or positions. It comes from alignment with divine truth. It cannot be granted by human institutions. It cannot be revoked by human disapproval. This is why Jesus faced such fierce opposition from religious leaders of his time. They weren't rejecting him because of what he did wrong. They were rejecting him because his very presence exposed the emptiness of their positional authority. Ask yourself, where in your life do you face opposition that seems disproportionate to your actions? Who seems threatened by you simply being authentic? What authority figures respond to your light by attempting to dim it? The appearance of your pharaoh is not a sign to retreat. It's confirmation you're walking in the right direction. It's evidence that what you carry is real. But here is where many chosen ones falter. They mistake the test of power as a command to fight power with power, to become hardened themselves, to adopt the very tactics used against them. This is not the way. Moses didn't overthrow Pharaoh through political maneuvering or military strength. He simply stood firm in his divine assignment, declaring, "Let my people go," while allowing God's power to manifest through a series of escalating signs and wonders. Your calling isn't to defeat those who oppose you, it's to transcend them, to stand so firmly in your truth that systems of control become irrelevant, to carry such authentic authority that positional power cannot touch your essence. You were not chosen to win human approval. You were chosen to demonstrate divine possibility, to show what happens when one person refuses to bow to fear, when one heart remains open despite pressure to close, when one voice speaks truth regardless of the consequences. The pharaohs of your life aren't there to stop you. They're there to reveal you, to show what you're truly made of, to demonstrate to all watching that authentic power cannot be intimidated, manipulated, or controlled. Will you stand firm when your pharaoh says no? Chapter 3. The Betrayer's Gift. There is perhaps no spiritual wound that cuts deeper than betrayal. To be abandoned by those you trusted. To be rejected by those you believed in. To be wounded by those you loved. And yet throughout sacred history, betrayal consistently precedes breakthrough. Consider the story of Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus with a kiss for 30 pieces of silver. A moment prophesied centuries before in Psalm 41. 9. Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. This wasn't a random act of treachery. It was a pivotal moment in the divine narrative. Without this betrayal, there would have been no crucifixion. Without crucifixion, no resurrection. Without resurrection, no redemption for humanity. What appears as the darkest moment in the story becomes the catalyst for its greatest glory. As a chosen one, you've likely experienced betrayal that left you questioning everything, relationships that dissolved when you needed them most, support systems that collapsed as you were rising, confidants who used your vulnerability against you. These moments aren't random. They're recognizable patterns in the journey of every chosen one. James, a 59-year-old entrepreneur, understood this pattern only in retrospect. After 2 decades building a successful consulting firm with his business partner and closest friend, he discovered this partner had been systematically diverting clients and resources to start a competing company. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. James recalled, "This was someone who had stood beside me through every challenge, someone I'd supported through personal crises, someone I trusted completely." The company James had sacrificed everything to build collapsed within months. At nearly 60 years old, he found himself starting over, questioning his judgment, wondering if his entire career had been built on illusion. "I was in the darkest place I'd ever experienced," James said. "I couldn't see any purpose in what had happened. I felt like a fool for trusting, for believing, for giving so much of myself." What James couldn't yet perceive was that this betrayal was actually a divine rescue. 6 months later, a global financial crisis hit that would have bankrupted their original company due to over-leveraged investments his partner had made without his knowledge. The very betrayal that seemed to destroy James's life had actually freed him from a catastrophic financial burden just before it collapsed. "The path I thought was mine wasn't actually mine to walk," James realized. What felt like abandonment was actually alignment. What looked like ending was actually beginning. This is the paradoxical gift of the betrayer in the chosen one's journey. They don't just wound you, they release you. They don't just hurt you, they redirect you. They don't just break your heart, they break the chains that were keeping you bound to a path that wasn't truly yours. In the biblical narrative, Joseph's brothers betrayed him, selling him into slavery. Yet this very act set in motion his rise to leadership in Egypt and the salvation of his family. David was betrayed by King Saul, forcing him into wilderness hiding. Yet this very experience forged the character and wisdom that made him Israel's greatest king. Ask yourself, what betrayal still haunts you? What rejection still shapes your decisions? What abandonment still influences how freely you trust? Now consider, what if that very experience wasn't random cruelty, but pivotal redirection? What if the relationships that couldn't accommodate your growth were lovingly removed to make space for those that could? What if the path that closed forced you onto the path that was always meant for you? The betrayer in your story isn't the author of your destiny. They're merely a character serving a purpose far greater than they understand. Their greatest power isn't in the wound they create, but in the wonder that follows when you refuse to let that wound define you. Every chosen one faces their Judas moment. But unlike Judas, who couldn't see beyond his own shame to the redemption that followed, you have the opportunity to recognize the hidden gift within betrayal. Your greatest breakthroughs are often waiting just on the other side of your deepest betrayals. Will you have the courage to walk through? Chapter 4. False Prophets and True Purpose. One of the most consistent patterns throughout spiritual history is this profound truth: authentic awakening is rarely recognized by the religious systems of its time. Consider the Pharisees, the religious leaders who opposed Jesus at every turn. These weren't evil men. They were dedicated scholars of Scripture who had memorized entire books of sacred text. They followed hundreds of detailed religious laws. They were respected pillars of their community, and yet they completely missed the divine standing right before them. Jesus addressed this spiritual blindness directly in Matthew 23:27-28. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. This wasn't mere criticism. It was revelation. The exposure of a pattern that would repeat throughout spiritual history. Form without substance, ritual, without relationship, religion without revelation. As a chosen one, you've likely experienced this tension firsthand. The disconnect between institutional spirituality and authentic experience. The gap between religious performance and spiritual transformation. The conflict between what others told you God is and what you've actually encountered. Linda, a 45-year-old healthcare worker, struggled with this conflict for decades. Raised in a strict religious home, she followed every rule, attended every service, and performed every expected duty. Yet internally, she felt spiritually empty. Something was missing, Linda explained. I knew all the right answers, but I didn't know the living presence. I could recite scriptures, but I couldn't hear God's voice. I was spiritually obedient, but not spiritually alive. When Linda began experiencing genuine spiritual awakening, dreams, intuitive knowing, synchronicities, profound compassion, she naturally shared these experiences with her religious community. The response was immediate and severe. She was labeled as deceived. Her experiences were attributed to emotional instability, or worse, demonic influence. Her questions were met with warnings rather than wisdom. It was as if my authentic experience threatened the entire system, Linda reflected. As if my direct connection to the divine somehow undermined the authority of those who claimed to represent it. What Linda was experiencing wasn't new. It was the same pattern that has played out whenever the chosen ones begin to awaken, the same dynamic Jesus faced with religious leaders who could quote scripture perfectly but couldn't recognize divine love when it stood before them. This opposition isn't random. It's recognition. Something in the system instinctively perceives authentic spiritual authority as a threat to established religious power. True spirituality cannot be contained by human systems. It cannot be controlled by human hierarchies. It cannot be constrained by human understanding. It flows like living water, breaking through artificial dams, finding new channels, nourishing unexpected places. Ask yourself, where have you felt the tension between religious expectation and spiritual experience? When have you been told your understanding is wrong simply because it's different? Who has attempted to convince you that God is smaller, safer, or more controllable than what you've actually encountered? The Pharisees weren't just characters in an ancient story. Their spirit continues wherever religious form is valued above spiritual substance, wherever doctrine is prized above direct experience, wherever control is chosen over transformation. This doesn't mean all religious traditions are false. Far from it. Authentic spirituality often honors tradition while transcending it, respecting the vessel while recognizing it cannot contain the vastness it points toward. As Jesus demonstrated, the chosen ones don't reject Scripture. They fulfill its deepest meaning. They don't abandon wisdom. They embody it. They don't discard truth. They demonstrate it. Your spiritual journey may not fit neatly within established religious boundaries. Your divine encounters may not match approved formulas. Your calling may not conform to recognized roles. This doesn't make you wrong. It makes you real. The chosen ones have always walked the narrow path between tradition and revelation, respecting the maps drawn by those who came before, while following the living compass within. Your authentic spiritual experience isn't rebellion against true religion. It's the very fulfillment of what religion was always meant to facilitate: direct, transformative encounter with the divine. Will you trust what you've actually experienced over what you've merely been told? Chapter 5. The Jezebel Spirit. There is perhaps no more insidious opposition to the chosen ones than what sacred texts reveal through the story of Jezebel. The embodiment of manipulation, intimidation, and spiritual control. Who was Jezebel? Far more than just a historical figure. She represents a specific spiritual force that arises to oppose divine purpose through control rather than confrontation, through manipulation rather than direct attack. In 1 Kings 19, 2-3, we see her strategy clearly. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Consider this profound truth. Elijah had just called down fire from heaven. He had just confronted and defeated 450 prophets of Baal. He had demonstrated extraordinary spiritual power and authority. Yet a single threat from Jezebel sent him running in fear, even praying for death. How could such a mighty prophet be so devastated by mere words? This reveals the unique power of the Jezebel spirit. It attacks not your circumstances, but your confidence, not your situation, but your spirit, not your outward strength, but your inward stability. As a chosen one, you've likely encountered this form of opposition. People who use words as weapons, relationships that drain rather than nourish, situations designed to make you question your worth, your calling, your sanity. Robert, a 61-year-old counselor, encountered this dynamic throughout his life without recognizing the pattern. From an emotionally manipulative parent to a controlling boss to a charismatic but demanding spiritual leader, he consistently found himself in relationships where his value was tied to his compliance. "I was drawn to strong personalities," Robert explained, "people who seemed so certain of everything, who always had the answers, who could make me feel special when I pleased them and utterly worthless when I didn't." This pattern culminated in a spiritual community where questioning the leader was labeled as rebellion, where personal revelation was only valid if it matched established doctrine, where members were encouraged to report on each other's spiritual infractions. "I gave that community 15 years of my life," Robert said, "defended them against critics, recruited others, donated significant money. And when I finally began questioning certain practices, I was systematically isolated. Friends stopped calling. Invitations ceased. My character was quietly assassinated through gossip and innuendo." What Robert was experiencing wasn't random. It was recognizable. The same pattern Jezebel used against Elijah. Isolation, intimidation, character assassination. Not physical persecution, but psychological warfare. This spirit operates through three primary tactics. First, isolation. Separating you from authentic community and genuine support systems. Creating environments where you're either completely alone or surrounded only by those who reinforce the controlling narrative. Second, intimidation. Using fear as a weapon. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of divine punishment, fear of being wrong, fear that without the controlling person or system, you cannot possibly succeed. Third, identity assault. Attacking your sense of who you truly are, convincing you that your worth comes from compliance rather than character. That your value is determined by performance rather than presence, that your identity is conferred by others rather than confirmed by God. Ask yourself, where in your life do you feel controlled rather than empowered? When do you find yourself performing for approval rather than expressing from authenticity? Who makes you feel simultaneously special and worthless, elevated and diminished? The presence of this opposition in your life isn't evidence of failure, it's confirmation of calling. The Jezebel spirit doesn't waste energy on those who pose no threat to established control systems. It arises specifically to oppose those who carry authentic spiritual authority. Authority based not on position, but on purpose, not on title, but on truth. Your liberation begins with recognition, with naming what you've experienced, with understanding that the battle isn't against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces that operate through human systems and relationships. The chosen ones aren't called to fight this spirit on its own terms, through manipulation, control, or fear. They're called to transcend it through authenticity, truth, and divine connection that no human system can sever. Will you reclaim the authority that is rightfully yours? Chapter 6. The Divine Transformation. There comes a moment in every chosen one's journey when the profound truth emerges from the crucible of opposition. What was meant to destroy you is actually designed to transform you. This divine alchemy, this sacred transformation, isn't merely spiritual theory. It's the consistent pattern revealed throughout sacred history. Joseph declared it to his brothers who had sold him into slavery. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. The Apostle Paul recognized this same principle when he wrote in Romans 8:28. "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." This isn't simplistic positive thinking. It's revelation of the deeper mechanics of spiritual reality. Gold doesn't become gold in comfortable circumstances, it becomes gold through fire. The intense heat doesn't destroy the gold, it purifies it, burning away everything that isn't gold until only the authentic remains. As a chosen one, the opposition you face isn't random cruelty, it's refinement with purpose. The internal shadows that emerge, the authority figures who oppose you, the betrayers who wound you, the religious systems that reject you, the controlling forces that attempt to diminish you. None of these can prevent your divine purpose. In fact, they're all serving it in ways they cannot comprehend. Diana, a 57-year-old artist, discovered this truth through a health crisis that nearly took her life. After decades of suppressing her creative gifts to pursue a practical career, her body began sending increasingly urgent signals that something was deeply wrong. "I ignored the whispers until they became screams," Diana recalled. Chronic fatigue, mysterious symptoms, eventually a diagnosis that forced me to stop everything. For the first time in my adult life, I couldn't distract myself with busyness. I had to be still, had to listen, had to face everything I'd been avoiding. During months of recovery, Diana began painting again, something she hadn't done since college. What began as simple therapy became a profound spiritual practice. Images flowed through her that seemed to come from beyond herself. People who saw her work were moved to tears without understanding why. "What seemed like the worst thing that could happen became the doorway to everything I was born for," Diana explained. "The illness wasn't my enemy. It was the divine intervention I needed to break free from a life that was slowly killing my soul." This is the paradoxical journey of the chosen one. What appears as opposition becomes opportunity. What looks like obstacle becomes opening. What feels like ending becomes beginning. Every major biblical figure experienced this pattern. Joseph's imprisonment positioned him to save nations. David's years as a fugitive prepared him to be king. Esther's captivity placed her perfectly to save her people. Paul's imprisonment spread the gospel further than his freedom could have. Ask yourself, what opposition in your life seems only destructive? What challenge appears to have no purpose? What pain feels like pure loss with no possibility of redemption? Now consider, what if that very experience contains hidden transformation that you cannot yet see? What if the fire isn't consuming you, but refining you? What if the pressure isn't crushing you, but creating a diamond? This perspective isn't about denying suffering or minimizing genuine pain. It's about recognizing the remarkable capacity of divine purpose to work through even the most difficult circumstances. You are not fragile. You are not a victim of random cruelty. You are a chosen one, being shaped through sacred transformation for purposes beyond what you can currently imagine. The adversaries in your story, whether internal shadows, external opposition, betrayal, religious rejection, or controlling forces, are not the authors of your destiny. They are unwitting participants in a divine narrative far greater than they comprehend. Like Joseph standing before the very brothers who sold him into slavery, you will one day look back at what opposed you and recognize the astonishing truth. What others intended for harm, God transformed for good. This isn't the end of your story. It's the transformation point. Will you trust the divine alchemy at work within your greatest challenges? Chapter 7. The Victorious Chosen One. Every sacred narrative points to this transformative truth. The opposition against the chosen ones doesn't prevent their victory. It ensures it. This isn't wishful thinking. It's the consistent pattern revealed throughout spiritual history. Those who face the greatest adversaries become the most profound examples of divine triumphs. In Romans 8:37, Paul declares this extraordinary reality. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Consider the power of this statement. Not merely conquerors, but more than conquerors. Not just surviving opposition, but being transformed by it into something greater than would have been possible without it. As a chosen one, walking this sacred path, you stand in a long lineage of those who faced seemingly insurmountable odds and emerged victorious. Moses confronted the most powerful empire on earth with nothing but a staff and divine instruction, and led an entire nation to freedom. David faced a giant with nothing but 5 stones and unwavering faith, and became the greatest king in Israel's history. Esther risked everything by approaching the king uninvited, and saved her entire people from genocide. Peter denied Christ 3 times in his moment of weakness, and became the rock upon which the church was built. Paul began as the church's greatest persecutor, and became its most influential apostle. The common thread in all these stories isn't the absence of opposition, it's the transformation of opposition into the very catalyst for unprecedented victory. Thomas, a 64-year-old community leader, embodied this truth through decades of persistent faith. Despite overwhelming challenges, born into poverty and facing systemic discrimination, his early life was defined by limitations imposed by others. Everything was stacked against me, Thomas recalled. Economically, educationally, socially, every door seemed closed before I could even approach it. What others couldn't see was the extraordinary spiritual awakening happening within him. Dreams and visions that showed him possibilities beyond his circumstances, a divine calling that transcended the boundaries others had defined. I heard this voice inside me saying, "You are chosen for purpose beyond what you can see." At first I thought I was losing my mind. Who was I to think I could make any real difference in this world? For 40 years, Thomas quietly served his community, mentoring youth, creating educational opportunities, building coalitions across traditional dividing lines. He faced resistance at every turn. Funding that mysteriously disappeared, partnerships that suddenly dissolved, reputation attacks from unexpected sources. There were times I nearly gave up, Thomas admitted. Times I questioned everything I thought I heard from God. Times the opposition seemed too coordinated, too persistent to be random. What Thomas discovered through decades of faithful persistence wasn't just survival, it was transformation. The very opposition that could have defeated him instead developed unprecedented wisdom, resilience, and spiritual authority. Today, the programs he created serve thousands. The leaders he mentored now hold influential positions. The community once defined by division now stands as a model of unity. The opposition that sought to diminish him, instead, magnified his impact beyond anything he could have imagined. I realized something profound, Thomas reflected. Every attack that didn't destroy me instead revealed another layer of strength I didn't know I possessed. Every obstacle that didn't stop me, instead, taught me another way to overcome. Every betrayal that didn't embitter me, instead, deepened my capacity for authentic compassion. This is the ultimate victory of the chosen one. Not the absence of opposition, but the transformation of opposition into unprecedented authority, impact, and purpose. Ask yourself, what if the very forces aligned against you are actually developing within you capacities that couldn't be formed any other way? What if your greatest victories aren't waiting for you on the other side of avoided challenges, but on the other side of transformed challenges? You are not merely fighting to survive your opposition. You are being forged through your opposition into a manifestation of divine purpose that couldn't exist without it. This is what it means to be more than conquerors. Not just winning the battle, but being transformed by the battle into someone who couldn't have existed without it. Not just overcoming obstacles, but having those very obstacles become the building blocks of your destiny. The opposition in your story was never random. It was recognition. Every internal shadow, every authority figure, every betrayer, every religious system, every controlling force. They all sensed something in you that you may not yet fully recognize in yourself. Authentic spiritual authority that cannot be conferred by human systems because it comes directly from divine source. Your victory isn't just about what you'll accomplish. It's about who you'll become through the journey, the compassion that could only be developed through suffering, the wisdom that could only be gained through challenges, the strength that could only be built through resistance, the authenticity that could only be refined through opposition. This is why you cannot be ultimately defeated. The very forces aligned against you are unwittingly participating in your becoming. They are playing their assigned roles in a divine story far greater than they comprehend. The emergence of a chosen one who carries authentic spiritual authority in a world desperately in need of genuine light. The question isn't whether you'll face opposition. The question is how you'll respond to it. Will you see it merely as obstacle? Or will you recognize it as opportunity? Will you allow it to embitter you, or will you permit it to ennoble you? Will you let it make you smaller through fear, or larger through faith? You are a chosen one. Not because you're perfect, but because you're purposeful. Not because you're without weakness, but because your very weaknesses become channels for divine strength. Not because you avoid opposition, but because you allow opposition to fulfill its transformative purpose in your life. Your greatest victory isn't just waiting in your future, it's unfolding in your present, in how you respond to every challenge with authentic faith, rather than fear with genuine love, rather than hatred, with unwavering truth, rather than compromise. The world doesn't need more people who've never faced opposition. It needs chosen ones who've been transformed by opposition into authentic carriers of divine possibility. Consider the words of Isaiah 54:17. No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and this is their vindication from me. This isn't just ancient wisdom, it's present reality for the chosen ones who understand that opposition isn't just something to overcome, it's something to integrate into your divine becoming. Look at your own journey. Reflect on the challenges that once seemed purely destructive, but later revealed their transformative purpose. Remember the betrayals that redirected you to your authentic path. Recognize the critics whose opposition actually confirmed your calling. What if nothing in your story has been wasted? What if every tear, every wound, every challenge has been gathering within you as potential energy, ready to be released as unprecedented power when aligned with divine purpose? The adversaries in your story aren't writing your ending. They're unwittingly participating in a plot twist they couldn't possibly anticipate, the emergence of a chosen one who transforms opposition into authority, wounds into wisdom, and challenges into channels for divine power. You aren't just surviving your story, you're being transfigured through it. Now is the time to step fully into this truth. To recognize opposition not as evidence against your calling, but as confirmation of it, to embrace challenges not as punishment, but as preparation. To understand that your greatest victory isn't escaping adversity, but being transformed through it into someone who couldn't have existed any other way. You are a chosen one, and your time of greatest opposition is about to give way to your season of unprecedented breakthrough. The journey we've shared today reveals a profound spiritual truth that transcends time. The very opposition you face isn't random. It's recognition of who you truly are. Throughout this sacred exploration, we've uncovered the divine pattern that repeats in the lives of every chosen one. The shadow within that reveals your greatest gifts. The authority figures who catalyze your breakthrough. The betrayers who redirect you to your true path. The religious systems that confirm your authentic awakening. The controlling forces that develop your genuine authority. The transformative process that refines you through every challenge. The ultimate victory that manifests not despite opposition, but through it. This isn't merely spiritual theory, it's the lived reality of every chosen one throughout history. From biblical figures who changed the course of nations to ordinary people who embody extraordinary purpose in our world today. You've been drawn to this message for a reason. The resonance you feel isn't accidental, it's recognition. Your spirit recognizing truth that your mind may still be processing. Your heart connecting with wisdom that your circumstances haven't yet revealed. The opposition you face isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's confirmation that you're doing something right. That you're awakening to purpose beyond what most will ever comprehend. That you're carrying light that naturally exposes darkness, both within yourself and within the systems of this world. You are not alone on this journey. Throughout history, the chosen ones have faced these same patterns of opposition and emerged victorious, not by avoiding challenges, but by being transformed through them. Your path forward isn't about eliminating obstacles. It's about embracing the divine alchemy that transforms every obstacle into opportunity, every resistance into resilience, every wound into wisdom. You are a chosen one. Not because you're perfect, but because you're purposeful. Not because you never struggle, but because you allow your struggles to serve your becoming. Not because you avoid opposition, but because you recognize the sacred revelation within it. If this message has stirred something deep within you, if you recognize yourself in this divine pattern, I invite you to like this video, subscribe for more sacred revelations, and comment 888 below to connect with others walking this same path of awakening and purpose. Remember, you were chosen not by accident, but by design. Not for comfort, but for purpose. not for ease, but for impact that only your unique journey could create. Your greatest chapter isn't behind you. It's unfolding even now,